Hello and welcome to a Super Bowl edition. That's right, I said it. We're not saying the big game. We're not just, finding words to use Chiefs, Eagles like that. We are saying this is a Super Bowl show. We are going to be drafting for the big game, drafting the big game contest on Underdog. And I'm personally pumped because I'm doing a lot of these solo, taking a lot of my DFS strategy, taking a lot of that. But usually we got a full slate. We've got a lot of players to choose from. We got multiple games. This is different. So no better time than bring on the person who is perfect for this. Cody, Mr. Showdown King, absolute GOAT, looking at the data, doing this as your, of all the niche sports, of all the niche activities, Showdown might be the most mainstream thing that you do. So we'll see what we can take from that and bring it to today. Cody, how are you doing?
We might have to remove the niche from the title here because this is the big game. I mean, this is the game that everyone is talking about. This is usually when my face is plastered all over your YouTube videos, all over the podcast streets as well, because everyone wants to bring me out of the woodworks for these games. So we can talk Quez Watkins, so we can talk Noah Gray, so we can talk Justin Watson, and talk about not having a main slate with a lot of players to choose from. The bottom half of some of these drafts are certainly fun to talk through, and certainly fun to talk through some of these players who can help us get unique. And I love Chiefs showdown slates. So you give me the Chiefs, you give me the Eagles. This is gonna be a fun one to talk through.
Nice. Yeah. Obviously, the game's going to be fun. Yeah. I think from a specific matchup, from a showdown, from a single game contest, you kind of get a story of opposites where Chiefs are one of the most, it feels like at least spread out because of Mahomes' skill level. Like he can make any player actually relevant for that slate. While on the Eagles side, yeah, you got three running backs, but there's not much spread out, especially in the close game. So it'll be interesting to think through how we can kind of, get unique, build lineups that actually have a chance for all this. But so Cody, let's do a quick background. So first off, if people have not yet listened to earlier in the week, I think it was earlier this week, you did a podcast with what was it, Adam and Leone, and kind of talking through the showdown aspect for this. What I loved about that is for a lot of us, we're not doing showdown that often. For you, this is just your bread and butter. This is your familiarity. So you've got years of data that you've done, dove through to really figure out hey, what are the optimal strategy aspects? But let's take it a high level. What kind of, talk to us about your showdown philosophy, strategy, and then I think we'll then go to how we can apply it to the Underdog and the drafting here.
Yeah, look, it's definitely evolved a ton. When I started with ETR, it was kind of at the point where we were starting to see $250,000 or more up top on the primetime island games on DraftKings. And that's kind of when the popularity took off. That's when we started to see $1 million contests or more for first place in 2019 and beyond. And I didn't have a track record. I didn't have a track record in Showdown. And so I thought, hey, what better way to start building some credibility for myself and to get better as a player than to start tracking this data. So starting in 2019, the latter part of the 2019 season, I just decided I'm going to download every single contest from these primetime island games. And we're going to start to review lineups, and we're going to see what winning players are doing. We're going to see what winning lineups are doing. We're going to see what the field is doing. And certainly that has evolved from 2019 into last year and definitely into this year, where we've seen the field kind of take that next step, that next level of now we're building lineups that project well. Now we're building lineups that most of the field is correlating properly. And on DraftKings, that comes down to correlating with your captain position. And here we'll talk through that, how that changes with the draft format. But now it's the whole new thing is being unique. And I think that discussion started a lot last year, has kind of come in more into the forefront this year. And I think that's one of the interesting things that we can talk about, and how that transitions from DraftKings and FanDuel over to this format where not every player is drafted in every single draft. And so you're going to have these opportunities at the end of drafts to try and get unique. But from a very high level, I still think that the main three tenets of Showdown are kind of just comes down to building lineups that project well, building lineups that are correlated whenever you can. And sometimes we talk through negative correlation in ways to build unique lineups. And that's kind of the third component is making sure that we don't have a lineup that is heavily duplicated. On DraftKings, it's a 470,000 entry tournament for their flagship. This one on Underdog is 113,000 entries. There are going to be a lot of lineups that are very heavily duplicated. Our goal is not to necessarily be, fully unique with all of our lineups that we enter into a tournament, but much less duplicated than the average lineup, I think, is our goal.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. And I mean, it's interesting because if you look at the Showdown streaks, or like the way that I've thought of it over the past few years is when I first started playing them, it was like, all right, let me tell the story of what's going to happen in this game and make sure that lineup makes sense. And then over the past couple of years, it was like, no, because that's actually how you're most likely going to get, duped. And so then you start building in rules for if you're, doing a max entry. And those rules, again, have a form of correlation. But all too often, correlation basically is directly correlated with lack of uniqueness, or like inversely correlated with uniqueness. And so then we have to start kind of deciding, well, how do we weigh the added value of correlation in a one game sample size versus the diminished value of uniqueness and stuff and sharing lineups. For Underdog, let's take it over there now. You mentioned projections, correlation, and uniqueness. Those are kind of the three levers that we can pull. On the Underdog side, I think projection and ADP probably align very well. Maybe players have different, we have different takes on players, but like for the most part, it's pretty standard. Correlation, it is a 4-person draft, or at least the main ones that are doing the big game. So there can be some correlation components, especially if you end up with a quarterback. And then uniqueness, we know you can get unique by drafting someone at the very end who's not being drafted. We've talked in a previous show. If you haven't seen that, go last week. I did a solo talking to a high-level strategy about how you can get unique maybe by like the way the people that you're choosing, because it doesn't fall normally into that draft. How do we think about how uniqueness and correlation may play a role in this kind of draft?
I think there's a few components that translate almost one for one. And the one that has stood out to me, I haven't done a ton of these drafts, but I have started to hop into a few. And it comes down to player combinations, I think, right? Like Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco, for example, are going to be drafted in every single one of these drafts, but they're not frequently going to be drafted together. Right. So I think in kind of the middle parts of these rounds, you can get players like a Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco, and you can tell yourself that story of, if we get a Chiefs route, or if the Chiefs not only cover but win by 2 touchdowns, we get a situation where both McKinnon and Pacheco can go off in the same lineup. And I think that is going to be a lineup that is relatively unique. It's something that we see translate fairly well, I think, from DraftKings in terms of not rostering or drafting those players together. And then at the end of drafts, there's guys at the end of these drafts where you're probably sacrificing a few projected points, but you're getting players like a Quez Watkins or a Sky Moore or a Justin Watson or a Noah Gray who aren't drafted in every single one of these drafts. And you could probably tell me better on some of the data behind, how often or how frequently you think these guys are being drafted in total. But I would imagine, 10, 15% or fewer of some of these drafts where you're seeing guys like Noah Gray be drafted at all. And if he happens to be the guy that goes off, gives you a huge advantage on the rest of the lineups. And then some of the other things I think that you can do, if you get, you can't necessarily do the onslaughts like we often talk about on DraftKings. And when I say onslaught, you have 6 roster spots on DraftKings. Onslaughting would just be drafting 5 players from one team and 1 from the other side. So maybe you've got a 5 Eagles, 1 Chiefs situation. You can't exactly onslaught here because it's just a 4 round draft. But you can get into a situation where you spend your early draft capital on one team and then maybe round it out with a final pick. Maybe you go 3 Eagles early. You get a Jalen Hurts, you get a Dallas Goedert, and then you get a Kenneth Gainwell or even Boston Scott or somebody like that. And then your final pick is one of those guys, one of those later options on the Chiefs side. And you've effectively built a kind of an onslaught. You're spending most of your draft capital, your early round picks on one team, and then leaving that last final spot for somebody on the Chiefs side and just kind of playing into that blowout nature.
Yeah. And I think, this team that I'm showing right now, so just going through, because you mentioned the Pacheco, the McKinnon, I like it, especially if you don't get Mahomes, because now this gives you a way to say like, hey, I've done some where it's like, okay, I'm going Pacheco, McKinnon as my only Chiefs because maybe their only scoring is on the ground. Or this also falls into that onslaught where I was just like, hey, how unique, I have Kelsey. I want to try to get unique. Let me now go with the Pacheco McKinnon. Can't think that a Kelsey Pacheco McKinnon is the way that, is a common start. And then, as you said, you're just getting that one off. And now when I'm going for a one off on the Eagles, I want to grab a running back who's not, directly correlating with the success of Jalen Hurts. So I think it's really interesting there. It's, as you said, like you're not able to do those 5 ones, but the 3 ones. And then when you add in the draft capital component, I love that. Didn't think about that, but I think that's a really good way to think about it too.
I was curious, like, how often do you think, getting into some of these guys at the back end, because I see Boston Scott on that team, looking at our rankings, maybe from like Quez Watkins down, Quez, Sky Moore, Justin Watson, Noah Gray, like, I don't know if you have data on this, or how frequently are those guys even being drafted at all? I've done a couple, and it seems like, uh, there's going to be a lot of drafts, so a lot of times where those guys just aren't even rostered.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Okay, so in this, we do not have projections. What we did is we basically tried to kind of rank the ones that are predominantly being drafted. Since, as it updates, you might see a couple guys fall into this 15.9, 15.8. It's interesting. When we have the full drafts, I built out basically some simulations to figure out like how often would someone being drafted at 15.8 be drafted like in a normal draft. I'm not sure that correlates to here. Also, this is not updated. So like this is more of a standstill, but like Kadarius Toney, he was 15.4 when we first input these. He's now moved up to an ADP of, I want to say around 13 or so. And so, I mean, it used to be that, hey, if you had a 15.9, that person was only being drafted in like 5% of drafts at most. I think it might be higher here. I still haven't thought fully through like how you would do the ADP projections for that. But as you said, like, you're never going to be, not never, you're highly unlikely to be able to get a fully unique player. I think you're pretty much not going to get a fully unique player that's going to put up any points. Yeah. Can you get a fully unique player that is on a team? I mean, can you get a non-fully unique player, but one that creates a unique team? Possible, but it's still unlikely given the structure. But then it's, as you say, okay, how do we still find a pretty strong unique team without giving up too much projections?
Right. And I think that's the goal. I'm also curious, like, what the dupe expectation is here for a winner in 113,000 entry contest with only 4 rounds. Would you expect the winner to be duped, 20 times, 50 times? Kind of what would be like an ideal range if you were building out a 150 set? How often would you want each average roster to be duplicated? Are you looking at like 10 or fewer, 15 or fewer? I mean, it's just a tough thing to gauge with such few ways to get unique in such a large contest. But I think there's probably like a break-even point where the EV of your lineup, because you're creating something that's more unique, is worse because you're sacrificing too much projection.
Yeah, I mean, so okay, 113,000. So divide that by 4. We're talking 28,000 people who are going to start off like they start that draft. So like there's only 20,000 that could obviously, because of your ever first pick is, then you grab Jalen Hurts, and what I'd say 90 to 95% of people, their next pick is going to fall into a bucket of 4. And those 4 players are something where the ADPs are like between 7 and 11 or something, 7 and 10. And so if you then stick within that range, you're keeping that more, direct path. And even then it's what we started 5,000, 20% because you divide up those 4. So now you're looking at like, okay, so of the 25% from 20%, now we're looking at a little under 5% from just that start. So, but 5% is still 5,000 lineups. And so now with your last 2, how do we go from 5,000 lineups down to ideally the 10? Like, you really need to get pretty crazy to get under 5, 10 uniques. I think how we should think about it from a goals wise is, 1, make sure you're not duping yourself. That's probably the worst thing you can be doing. Similar to if you were playing a showdown, you're entering the same lineup in twice, like you're just missing out on substantial value when you could just be making a tiny adjustment. 2, I think a lot of people are drafting the first 3 rounds normal and then trying to get crazy with that 4th. And so even though those 15-point players at the very end of the drafts like aren't being drafted that often, I think majority of the time they are getting drafted though with the same structures for the first 3. So it may not be as unique as you think. So if you can find a way to actually get unique with one of your first 3 picks, and unique doesn't mean that it doesn't not, you're taking someone that's not being drafted. It's just starting to create a unique structure. I think that's how you can start getting these teams that are probably projected to be under that, like, 20 dupes and such. Because let's do the simple math real quick. So 0.25 times 0.2. We'll say the next one is times 0.1. We're at 0.005. Multiply that by 113,000. That's still 565 with 1 pick remaining. So if we then think, okay, if we draft a 10% guy, we're at 56. If we can get a 1% guy, you're at 5. If that's how much that last pick obviously matters. But if you can, we don't want to draft a 1% guy because that's the guys that are 16.0. Those are the ones who projected wise probably aren't going to score any points. So if we can get unique into earlier picks, instead of starting off with just going to 25, 20, 10, maybe it's 25, 10, 10, 25, 10, 5%. Like that big difference there gets you down to 140 instead of 565. So like a lot of value just from those early changes. I know there's a lot of numbers thrown out, but just trying to think through like these are the things that you're doing from a showdown to figure out how you can get to this expected dupe number.
Right, and how changing your product ownership in terms of the DraftKings aspect of it, how dropping from a 10% on player to a 1% on player can drastically reduce your expected dupes, and you can do that in a variety of ways in these drafts. And I think the most interesting aspect, going back to the player level and kind of the slate level analysis, is that there are a lot of players after those first, I would say 5 picks with Devonta Smith. You get into that group of Dallas Goedert, kind of down to like the Kadarius Tonys. You could maybe even throw the kickers in there where like you're sacrificing some projection there, but there's this big range that if you're looking in terms of like a full PPR projection, you're probably only sacrificing 3, maybe 4 points at most on some of these positions. So yes, you're gonna build a lineup that projects worse from a base level, but you're also getting paid off with a more unique structure and probably higher expected value overall. So I think that's an interesting way to go about it, is probably sacrificing a little bit of projection kind of in those middle 2 rounds and building a unique structure after getting one of those top guys in the first round and kind of working through it from there, and then finding that last final piece that maybe correlates with your lineup. Maybe it doesn't, but is, one of those guys in kind of that Justin Watson, Noah Gray, Quez Watkins type range that helps you get a little bit more different at the back end of the draft as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. All right, I think we see a big gap. It's interesting. So you have Kadarius Toney as like the last skill player. You then have Butker and Elliott. I do want to get into the kickers in a second because I just want to remind people the scoring is very different for kickers than what we're used to. It hurts them a lot. So I'll get into that. They're really tempting to pick because you're like, oh, I didn't get a quarterback or a pass catcher on the other side, so let me just grab the kicker because maybe he'll get the points. I think it's a trap, and we'll go into that in a minute. But of these 15s, what jumps out to you as, again, we're not looking for a 12-point. We're not looking for a major, hey, slate buster. We're looking for, can any of these players get the 7 or 8 that outscore the player that majority we're choosing up here?
That's the biggest point, and that's the reason why I like these Chiefs guys. And I feel like I've mentioned Justin Watson and Noah Gray too much already, but to me, just with the way that this Chiefs team is structured right now, and we're still dealing with question marks around Kadarius Toney's health, we're dealing with question marks around Juju Smith-Schuster's health, and not only their health, but their participation in the offense. Kadarius Toney is still a guy that's in there for 25 to 30% of the team's routes. I know he's got this monster targets per route run rate, but give me these guys down here, Justin Watson, who could do it in a single play. Noah Gray, who is a guy that's getting touches near the red zone, near the goal line in the red zone area as well, could rush one in. Would not be crazy to see him take a rushing attempt near the goal line as well. And I think that's just a way you can sacrifice a little bit of base projection. But Justin Watson has a 20-yard ADOT. I could see Justin Watson. I know Leone touted the 80-1 2-touchdown bet for the long shot props. I think Justin Watson is certainly one of those guys who is not drafted in every draft that could be one of the guys that, not only beats his teammates, but ends up in kind of a winning lineup type build.
Yeah, I hear that. Okay, let's touch on the kickers real quick, just so everyone has familiarity in case you had not seen this. So kicker scoring, extra point missed, losing 2 points. And field goals, if you make one less than 50 yards, you get 3. So if you make a 45-yarder, we're used to that getting 4. Here it's only 3. If you make a field goal more than 50, we're used to that being 5 or 6. Here it's only 4. So not only are the field goals made not making as many points as we're used to, but and if you miss a field goal, you lose a point. So you're losing a point for a field goal. You're losing 2 points for an extra point, and you're not getting nearly as many points when you make field goals. Gosh, kickers feel like a trap to me.
And good on Underdog for doing it this way. I think the way that DraftKings has it set up historically, they're starting to trend the prices a little bit closer to where I think they should be. We had this run kind of towards the end of last year and the beginning of this year where kickers were like 3,600 to 3,800, and it always felt like they were $200 or $400 underpriced. And they always popped as good values. And you know, if they're going to pop as good values, then we should roster them. It kind of came to a point where it was just like almost this too obvious type of things, particularly in cash game style contests, where it's like just roster the kickers because of the safe floor. Because if teams are scoring points, then you're out there for the extra points. If teams are struggling, then that means the offensive pieces are struggling, and the kickers don't need to do much to outscore them. Here with the Underdog scoring format, it does look like, hey, I didn't get one of the quarterbacks. I need, you know, at least I'll get the extra points if I'm out there. It's going to be hard for them to post a ceiling that is going to make you upset for not having them. You know, if you get 3 40-yard field goals, which I think would be a pretty positive outcome in this game, that's still only 9 points, right? And you throw in an extra point, that's 10 points. Maybe that's enough. But I think,
and assuming no misses, you start
assuming
missing,
no
you take
misses,
points
exactly
away.
right. And I think that's the big thing, like the downside risk of if they miss a field goal, and or if you just get all these 45-yard field goals where you're still only getting 3 points. I think that the skill position players that are being drafted around them still have good shots, at least in total. Maybe it's tough to pick the specific guy, but I think in total, those skill position players are just better picks in general.
I like it. I agree. And I will admit, I have definitely fallen into the trap because it works with kind of construction wise, but gosh, I just need to keep reminding myself, like, it really does feel like a trap. Okay. Let's jump in a draft or two. Here we go. As we're waiting for this to fill, see a lot of people. Thanks for everyone joining us in the comments as well. Yeah, I see some best ball talk going. The next best ball tournament, the first best ball tournament for 2023 with $1 million in prizes, launches today. So they will be doing a live draft from the Underdog house in Arizona at the Super Bowl. And then I believe directly after that draft, the big board will be up. And we have been in the labs building out projections. I've been fighting with myself, listening to a lot of getting some great feedback from some people on the team, trying to learn as much as we can about these rookies, where they should fare, because the big board is that first tournament, and it does start tonight or tomorrow. So pretty excited for that.
Best ball season never ends, right?
Officially now. I mean, last year it was crazy when it was like, oh my God, it's already March or April and we're drafting for this. Like the draft hasn't actually happened. And now literally the season hasn't even ended. And they're making it very clear there is no off season for best ball. No complaints here.
No complaints. It is a great time to be in these streets.
Okay. So when I know you said you were diving into a few of these, have you tried to get unique with the first couple picks? Have you just said like, hey, I'm mostly just going to go with the quarterback or a Kelsey if it falls to me? What's your overall approach, Ben?
In round one, I have not been doing anything crazy. Pretty chalky starts for me. Although I'm willing to mix it up a little bit. Like if I were to get the 101 100 times, you know, maybe it's like 55-45 or 60-40 Hurts Mahomes. But yeah, Mahomes very clearly the 102 for me. Hurts drops to us here. That's pretty nice. I like Hurts at the 102. But for me, the opportunity cost is too great, I think, to do something like way off the board in the first round. Maybe you can make a case like with the Devonta Smith, AJ Brown at like kind of the 1-5, 1-4 to at the 1-4. Maybe you could do something a little bit different there. But pretty chalky for me at the start, and then maybe find ways to get different from there.
Yeah, especially for the quarterbacks. And I think the upside of choosing one of the quarterbacks in the first one, like obviously you have just the points aspect, but maybe you get lucky and you get the Mahomes-Kelsey combo. Maybe you get lucky and you get the Hurts, AJ Brown, Hurts, Devonta Smith, Sanders, like something that normally doesn't really fully fall there. So it's worth taking those chances. Like here, we're going to get AJ Brown or Devonta Smith with a Hurts combo, which might be the first time that I've actually gotten it. So already getting some nice uniqueness here.
Yeah, you get a team that is better projected and is also unique, because these drafts or these starts just aren't very common.
Right. And I mean, like, so from the 4-5, I kind of like what Mark is doing here.
Yeah.
I personally have done a bunch of Sanders Pacheco. I've done a bunch of Sanders McKinnon. I've done some Sanders with like a one-off, Kansas City pass catcher. But just trying to get against the grain, because going with like 2 of the Eagles to start off, but knowing you're not going to have the Hurts, I guess you could go with like a Sanders, Brown, Sanders, Devonta, and hope that covers majority of the points. But like, you can't go 2 of the pass catchers there, because if they both have great games, that Hurts combo probably is going to beat you anyways.
Right.
Yeah, I know, Tyler. This is my first Hurts, Brown, or Devonta Smith. I've gotten a couple Hurts and Sanders, which even feels rare. The Hurts and Goddard happens a ton.
That's one combination that I think will be very popular. The Hurts Goddard happens quite frequently. Will be a very popular start.
Okay, what are we thinking here? We could go with the onslaught, grab Gainwell, does correlate with Hurts with the amount that he's catching passes. We could go with the running back on Kansas City with McKinnon. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think going Gainwell here is pretty sharp. It gives us kind of that onslaught. We've already got a really nice projected start. And then I like McKinnon. I like MVS. I think with the question marks at the wide receiver position for KC, he certainly makes a strong case. But I don't think there's just that much of a separation between, MVS and even down to Tony and one of the guys that we can grab in the final round with like Sky Moore or Justin Watson or Noah Gray. I think that we have reasonable chance for one of those guys to outscore somebody like MVS or McKinnon.
Yeah, and like we're talking about onslaughts, I actually like the Eagles onslaught better than the Kansas City one, because with the final pick on the opposite team, if you're onslaughting Kansas City, you're kind of limited to like either Boston Scott or Quez Watkins.
Yeah.
With Eagles, we have a variety of picks. So here we are.
Yeah.
We have, I don't know how we don't just go McKinnon or
yeah.
Yeah. It's got to be McKinnon, right?
Wow. Yeah. Great draft.
Here we're just getting uniqueness aspects. We are getting the, run options on the other side. So we don't need Mahomes to have like the day for Tony. We're just going to take pure projections here and hope that this team works out.
Yeah, that's a great draft.
Well, that was fun. We're gonna pop in again, and let's see what we can keep up the sun run. All right, here we go.
Can they call that the influencer 102 when Jalen Hurts drops to you, and then you also get Devonta Smith in there as well?
Yeah, you didn't want the influencer 101, I guess, this year. Actually, I don't know. You were still happy. We were going McCaffrey early on, but all those JT people. Have you looked at all at 2023 from a rankings, from a projection? From like a best ball standpoint?
I have not yet.
Or dynasty rookies. Yeah.
For anyone that is sick enough out here to still be drafting right now or wanting to start drafting right now, you're probably sick enough to potentially be interested in the XFL. We will be covering the XFL. That is where I will be, at least for the next couple of months. And then hopefully I can dive into the best ball streets after that. But I am one lane laser focused as soon as the Super Bowl is over on the XFL.
Fill me in on the drama. Are we going to have live scoring?
We are going to have live scoring. I think that has been confirmed. Hopefully that was just a small blip on the radar. And It seems like at least the XFL socials are posting, full team rosters and depth charts, and they're very transparent about cuts and team additions and things of that nature. So the USFL was a bit messy from that regard. So hopefully the XFL is a little cleaner.
Because when the XFL first launched, I was head first into it. I think I was one of the 3 highest volume players on there, and it was an absolute blast. I watched every game. It was great. Last year, let's go here first. So this is where we're talking about. We're like, hey, this is the traditional. How do you want to get unique here? We can go Sanders Pacheco. We can go 2 Eagles, but not the pass catchers.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm curious to see where you would go with this, because I would probably take one of those guys, but maybe that's not a unique enough start. Maybe we do go Sanders, Pacheco to get very different. But maybe the Eagles onslaught start here without the AJ Brown is unique enough, but maybe you could talk me out of that.
Yeah, I'm down with anything. I don't think there's, other than just the AJ Brown Devonta Smith combo, I think if we go with Sanders, pretty much anything here, you've just got to go a bit more unique later on.
Yeah.
And so I've done some of the Sanders Pacheco. Let's go with the Sanders Devonta in the onslaught here and see what we can get to fall to us on the other side. But now the one thing I want to make sure is that I'm not just going to try to grab the one off with my 4th round, But in the third round, I think you really want to try to get unique as well.
And I think this also probably sets up, since we have Smith, I guess the only other option right now would be a Quez Watkins, but probably prioritizing, if you're going back to the Eagles side, prioritizing somebody like Kenneth Gainwell or Boston Scott ahead of, someone like Quez Watkins.
Yep, agreed. Yeah. So in this structure, like, what are your general thoughts on, I don't know how much you dove into the Eagles with regards to playing Sanders and Gainwell, Sanders and Boston Scott? Like, does Boston Scott truly just vulture? So there's, that hurts, or is it more of, well, hey, you can have more of a run game plan, higher scoring. We don't care that they're just kind of vulturing each other.
I think there's room for both types of outcomes here. I do like the double stacking of the running backs there, because you do get that uniqueness. I don't think Sanders and Gainwell will be drafted often together. I don't think Sanders and Scott will be drafted all that often together. But I'm kind of the mindset, and this is how I'll be playing it on DraftKings, that like Sanders is the true RB1, and the reason why he hasn't been getting the second half or late game touches is because the team views him that way. So I do certainly think that it's Sanders' backfield, unless the game gets out of hand. But these guys, Gainwell and Boston Scott, are definitely going to mix in.
Okay. I like having him in here. We don't have Jalen Hurts, so we don't want this to be a very pass heavy. So if we kind of cover more of the ground here and Devonta Smith just gets a touchdown, like or a decent amount of yards. On the other side, it is so hard to click CEH over Jerick McKinnon, but like, that's got to be the right play, right?
Yeah, I think that McKinnon team, or even a Juju team there, is just going to be way too heavily duplicated, right? Like, yeah, that just ends up being a team that's probably negative EV based off of how often it's drafted. That's a pretty common build, even with the Sanders plus Gainwell. So yeah, you're sacrificing a lot of projection there, but you're sacrificing a lot of projection in order to be unique. And I think that was pretty sharp.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that 4 spot, it's tough. Because you really are saying, hey, I'm either going to go with the chalk, and then because you get solid picks to fall to you in that 12-13 range. It's in the pre-kickers, actual skill players that can put up points. But if you just continue those players, you're not going to have any. Yeah, you're going to be crazy duped.
Yeah, it is. It's tough to see the guys like Jerick McKinnon and Juju Smith-Schuster go after your selection of CEH, but that's the kind of nature of the beast with these 4-man drafts, and that pick in particular, that 4-5 pick, is just real tough.
Yeah. All right. One more thing I wanted to touch on before we go. A lot of people early on might have been drafting some Hardman. Obviously, I don't know if Hardman is still in the list here, because now that he's officially out, there we go. But earlier on, he was only questionable. And so maybe people were drafting him. Super Bowl comes around, they're going to have late swap abilities, which means they can, before the draft, say, hey, here are the players that I want to replace with. What would you think of, like, who are those? Okay, so first off, with the late swap, we probably want to be focusing on players that either have not been drafted earlier in the week. So even now, they still don't have a level of ownership that you'd expect. So that might be a Tony or a Juju situation. Or you say, hey, I now have seen that Noah Gray and Justin Watson have not been drafted much this entire draft. Should I use my late swap to grab one of those guys that's low projected, but maybe has that outcome, but we know has uniqueness?
So what are the overall rules on late swap? You can use it on, so you could use it on anyone from the Chiefs side, or how's that?
Yeah. So in general, it's anyone from a game that hasn't started that is at that same position. This is super flex. This is just one game. So the only rule that it's going to follow is you have to have at least one player from each team. So if if everyone else in your team were Eagles and then you grab McCall Hardman, it has to be a Chief. Otherwise, it can be any player. And it's just going to be, you set your rankings, and when the game starts, it'll automatically go, okay. Because if you had Hardman in 10 drafts, Kenneth Gainwell might be available in this one, but not in this draft. So it'll not just be in 1-to-1 swap. It'll go down your list
based off of your rankings. Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. I think, gosh, it's so hard to do from a kind of like a global aspect, because it will change based off of like team by team, because if you can't
change it, you got to set your rankings ahead of time. And
because those teams that you feel like are already unique enough with like a Mecole Hardman in them, you probably want to just go for the projection with somebody like, someone that's available, like a Juju or an MVS if he's there, or McKinnon. But man,
I'll say this though. Most people who drafted Hardman probably have Hardman as their unique piece because he was getting drafted late. He was a riskier pick. So my guess is people are saying, hey, this was my unique or one of my uniques. So you probably want to lean into also ranking more unique plays.
Right. So that brings into play the Justin Watson, the Noah Gray, the Sky Moore, Quez Watkins would be in that group as well. That's probably how I would have it. Justin Watson, Noah Gray, Sky Moore, and then Quez Watkins after that. But man, that is tough because it does change based off of how each team is structured, but it's kind of a thing that you just have to set and forget and hope that the right pieces fall in the right lineups.
Yeah, I agree. I think the only option that I'd go back and forth on is like where Kadarius falls. And maybe you actually take a look at your lineups and see, because like Kadarius was being drafted at the very end of drafts previously, but also like he's being drafted still in the 4th round now. So it's not like he moved all the way up to a 2nd or 3rd round pick where you're getting unique structures. Majority of people who've been drafting him now are still getting him in the 4th. So your swap doesn't really get you that much value. I think you just got to go with, one of those Watson, Watkins, Gray, one-off guys, maybe even CEH.
He should be in that mix, I think, as well, for sure.
The one thing I like about CEH is like, there's a very good chance he doesn't play a snap. He does nothing. But also there's a chance that like we've seen what's happened with McKinnon these past couple of weeks. Maybe he's got some kind of lingering issue. Maybe he's fallen out of favor as he's gotten more worn down as the season went on. And they're like, no, we want CEH to be our pass catcher and Pacheco's the grinder. Maybe we want CEH around the goal line now that he's healthy. It's possible, but like he has probably the greatest opportunity to exceed expectations, not counting like, hey, a fluky, the deep Justin Watson 2 touchdown games.
Right. Absolutely. It's just the unknown that you can bake into his upside. And it is him being just like the RB2.
The person with saying fresh legs with legs in their profile picture, it just works out too well. Okay. Any other final thoughts you have? This has been great. This has been enjoyable. Chat, you were awesome. But Cody, what is the one final tip you have one for this weekend? It could be draft, it could be showdown, it could be sports betting. What do you got for people?
Get unique. Get unique. You don't want to win a Super Bowl showdown and chop it up with 100 of your closest friends or more. Get unique. Draft those Justin Watsons. Draft those Noah Grays. Hopefully we see some weird, fluky touchdowns. We've definitely seen it from the Eagles side with the Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott stuff of late. For me, I'm hoping to see it on the Chiefs side this week because I'm going to have way too much exposure to this Justin Watson, Noah Gray, Sky Moore, and now probably CEH after talking to you group of Chiefs players. So hopefully we see some weird touchdowns from Kansas City.
I like it. And for me, at your Super Bowl parties, see what kind of odds you can get with friends that Boston Scott scores a 3-yard touchdown. The Eagles have had 3 plays from the 3-yard line in the past 3 games. And every single time they gave it to Boston Scott, 2 of them were touchdowns. So here it is, calling it now, Super Bowl, Boston Scott, 3-yard touchdown. Put it on the board. All right, this is fun, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Have a fantastic Super Bowl week. Keep an eye out over the weekend or early next week. We'll get rankings up for the big board for best ball drafting. Hey, we are starting early, and I'll be back throughout the offseason doing more of these shows, putting up articles and all of that. Enjoy your Super Bowl. Cody, thank you very much for joining us. Where can people find you?
At CMain7 on Twitter, but more importantly, we will be doing Establish the Million for the DraftKings and FanDuel Showdown slates with Dink and Leone tomorrow morning. So if you are an ETR subscriber, please be sure to check that one out. That'll be the final show, I believe, of the 2022 NFL season.
That'll be awesome. That'll be fun. All right, I'm pumped. Everyone, enjoy your Super Bowl. We'll see you later.